I'm sure you're also going to be wanting to make your calls about my next guest and what he has to say. He is Lord Brady, as was Sir Graham Brady. As I say, the literal man in a grey suit.
Not today.
It's dark blue today. Yes. Dark blue today. Former chairman of the 1922 Committee of Backbench MPs, which we have seen so much of over recent years. Your new book, your memoirs, are called, and it's a wonderful title, Kingmaker: Secrets, Lies and the Truth About 5 Prime Ministers. Because you, of course, held that job from 2010. You've done them all of the recent Prime Ministers. Just in terms of being Kingmaker, because that's what you were perceived as being. You're representative of backbench Tory MPs. You were the person who would go to the Prime Minister and say, look, Prime Minister, this is what your MPs are saying. This is what they've asked me to tell you. How many times do you think what you said to the sitting Prime Minister, whether it was Cameron or May or Boris Johnson or Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss, how many times do you think that changed policy or surprised the Prime Minister?
Well, I hope from time to time it changed policy. Certainly, I think what people often get wrong is they assume, given that I was there at the end in most cases, given that the 1922 committee was responsible for holding some of those confidence votes and so on, they assumed that we weren't there to help. Actually, even where I possibly had a slightly difficult relationship with one of the Prime Ministers previously, I was still there trying to give good advice, trying to help, trying to make it work.
Always behind the scenes. Now, you were extraordinary. I've known you well. I've known you a long time. You never gave away anything to anybody about those letters of no confidence. People would say, oh, there are 35 and they're just a few away from getting a no confidence vote. You didn't tell anybody. Did you tell members of your own committee?
No, I didn't tell members of my committee.
Only an MP who wrote the letter and you were the only people who would know.
That's right. I mean, obviously sometimes colleagues would write a letter and they go on television saying, I've written a letter, so-and-so has to go. It's come to that point. But if they kept it confidential, then I wouldn't say anything about it. And I respect that still in the book. Yeah. So there are people I name, but they're ones who went public themselves. The others, I think, are entitled to privacy.
OK, now you did reveal, though, that when Rishi Sunak actually called that early election, which many speculated was the reason why there was such a big defeat for the Tories in July, was actually because he feared that he was about to face a vote of no confidence. You've revealed, though, that actually there were only 10 letters of no confidence that you'd received at that point.
Indeed, and whilst, I mean, the book is intended both to be the story of my life and it's supposed to be fun, I want people to enjoy reading it, that's one of the things which I thought was particularly important to set out, because whilst I wouldn't reveal the identity of people who've written letters to me asking for a confidence vote, I am able to give the timeline. And I think for historians, for students of political science, it's actually really important to see how that moves and in reaction to what events.
Let's talk about the Prime Ministers you had to deal with and you have these private audiences with, say Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss and Sunak. I mean, 5 different Prime Ministers over those years since you became chair of the 1922 Committee in 2010. Who did you admire the most, and who didn't you get on with?
Well, I like Rishi Sunak a lot. I find him a very easy person to talk to, who's always very friendly, and I always thought it was quite odd, the public perception that because he happens to be very wealthy, he would be out of touch and aloof. I never found that at all. He just always seemed very grounded, down to earth, very normal. Very little ego, which is quite unusual in senior politicians, as you know.
Could possibly comment.
Respect. I always respected Theresa May. Huge dedication to public service.
Not a very good Prime Minister, though.
Well, it all went horribly wrong, and there's no two ways about that. And it was a very painful period, and it was quite sad because she was always trying to do the right thing. And then, of course, David Cameron, the first Prime Minister of my 5, was somebody who I'd had some disagreements, falling out with in the past. It was when he supported David Willet's making what I thought was a rather silly speech, criticising grammar schools, that I resigned from the front bench in 2007.
Because David Cameron, of course, went to Eton. You are a grammar school boy. Now, you've revealed in the book, and I would say I wasn't surprised by this, that David Cameron and George Osborne, his chancellor, and they were, I mean, 2 peas in a pod, those two, very, very close, that some very snobby attitudes towards people who hadn't gone to the right kind of school, in their view.
Well, I say that I thought David Cameron was less likely to show that than George Osborne, but I do, because this is diary based, I went back over notes that I'd taken at the time, and there were some things that really jumped out at me, and the one relating to George Osborne, the story that I tell, when I was Shadow Schools Minister, shadowing David Miliband, I just asked a question about grammar schools in the chamber, and the three of us were entering the tea room at about the same time, and George turned to David Miliband and said, "Oh, David, don't bother about Graham. He's a grammar school boy, you know."
Wasn't a joke?
Was it a joke? I thought it was inappropriate at the time. And you know,
I mean, it's actually so revealing, that attitude. Again, top public school boy, all the privilege in the world, coming from money, criticising somebody who's had to work hard at school to get ahead.
And we'd just come out of the battlefield, if you like, and there he was fraternising with the enemy.
Well, I was at uni with George Osborne. No, God knows what he made of me, a comp girl. I mean, well, you know, did I pass muster? I don't care what you think, mate, anyway. But that's the thing, it is extraordinary, that attitude. A lot of people probably think that you're a Tory, you're a Tory peer now, you had a title for a long time as well, that you are another one of those Tory posh boys, but actually you don't come from that sort of background at all.
No, and it's quite amusing now. I find being addressed when I go into the House of Lords as my lord. It'll take a little bit. You love it. I love it. But it'll take quite a lot of getting used to. It's a very strange thing.
What do you make of the current row over freebies and over you know, these the peers giving donations? We know this 'twas ever thus. You know, I was very critical, as you know, of Boris Johnson for a bunch of his freebies, lots of which weren't declared, or he declared them but wouldn't say which particular Tory donor was behind them, you know, the freebie villa in the Caribbean, or who was paying for the wallpaper. Was there wallpaper? We still don't know what on earth was going on with the redecoration of the number 11 flat that Prime Minister lives in. The defence from Keir Starmer has been, and Rachel Reeves and Angela Rayner, everybody has been, we obeyed the rules. The only reason you can castigate us for this is we declared all of these gifts. Does that pass the smell test for you?
Well, I don't think it does, but most especially because of the gross hypocrisy involved. Because when members of a previous government said that they'd followed all the rules and they'd made all the proper declarations, and that's the only reason they could be criticised, the Labour Party and the individuals in particular, Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, Angela Rayner, they were all there criticising. And you know, most especially now over this private photographer for Angela Rayner, she attacked Boris Johnson for precisely the same thing.
And do you think those criticisms were correct at the time?
These are judgment calls. I think some things are appropriate. I don't think it's unreasonable for a Prime Minister to have a photographer. That's even part of the public record that's being kept, and it's, of course, important to communicate. But I think, obviously, you can't do it if you're going to criticise others for doing the same thing.
Let's talk about the two occasions when you, in your position as chairman of the 22 committee, you did actually receive enough letters of no confidence. And from MPs, it was 15% of the number of MPs that there were at any time, and you had to go to both Theresa May in 2018 and Boris Johnson in 2022 and say, hello, Prime Minister, I'm here to tell you that I've got enough votes and there will now be a vote of confidence in you. Tell us what that's like. Tell us how you were received. I mean, both of those Prime Ministers at that time won those votes and continued for some time. I would say staggered on at that point. Tell us how those conversations go. What was the reaction from both of them when you said this?
Well, I mean, with Theresa, I mean, it was a particularly odd experience for me because I'd asked for a meeting with her urgently the next day. She was away in Warsaw at a NATO summit at the time, and somebody in number 10 leaked the fact that I was seeking an urgent meeting. So I remember vividly I was going to it was a drinks party for Conservative donors being held at Bonham's, I think it was, on Bond Street, and I went down the tube, the escalators at the tube at Westminster, 2 stops on the tube, and as I came up at the other end at Bond Street, my mobile phone started to vibrate wildly, and it was as though it was going to fall apart.
People like me calling you.
About 150. I had so many missed calls on the phone because that had gone public. So it had already broken in a sense, and we arranged that Theresa was going to phone me as soon as she touched down at Northolt when she got back from Warsaw that night. And I think it was about 9:30 at night, but she knew what to expect. So you know, the conversation essentially was one of Graham.
So it was on the phone in the end?
It was on the phone. And Graham, I assume this means that the threshold has been met. Yes, I'm afraid it has.
So she knew from, did she know from you previously that you were close to it?
No, because I never revealed that.
Okay.
I think it's really important that anybody doing that job keeps it completely
But there was
confidential.
lots of speculation in the press.
Lots of speculation. So I think to a point, sometimes there's a little bit of relief because all the tension has gone about is it going to happen, isn't it going to happen? And what she asked me was, when I made it clear we had to have that confidence vote and we should do it fairly soon, but there was a bit of leeway. There was no reason to do it the next day, which I think was a Wednesday. She had Prime Minister's questions. But she said, how soon could you do it? I said, well, we can do it tomorrow if that's what you want. She said, please do. So
get it over and done with.
Very rapid movement.
And what was the reaction from Boris Johnson in 2022? Because I mean, there was always so much hubris from him, and there was just this idea that I've taught my way out of scrapes all my life. With my women, with my jobs, I mean, every revelation about him. He didn't have skeletons in his closet. Everything was just piled out there in the open for everyone to see, even before he was elected as London Mayor, let alone as Tory leader. So he obviously felt, I'm going to get through this. What was his reaction when you said there is going to be a vote of no confidence?
Well, I mean, again, it was over the phone. It happened to be the day of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee procession and all of the great events to celebrate that. And that had been a huge tension for me because we were building up. As we came up to the House Rising the previous week, it was quite obvious we were getting close to it. And my colleagues were a little bit careful, some of them saying, I'm going to put a letter in, but maybe I'll wait a week.
There's this view that you couldn't, don't interrupt those
we could have become the story. I think we would have been very, very unpopular.
It's quite a responsibility, isn't it? Although you are just representing backbenchers. You've been in politics a long time. You're still in politics, even retiring as an MP. You've been MP since 1997 until the summer. It's very, very clear that the huge swathes of the population, I would say probably the majority of the population, don't hold politicians with very high esteem. They don't hold journalists like me with much esteem either. But, what do you think could change? What do you think MPs could do differently or governments could do differently so that our MPs are much more respected? And that's not covering up wrongdoing or hypocrisy, but what could they do differently? What could be different in the rules or whatever that could improve the standing of the people who represent us?
Well, I worry that our system of parliamentary government doesn't really do that job anymore because it requires a huge amount of patience. It requires the voting public to elect a representative, send them off to Westminster for 4 or 5 years, and then at the end of it make a judgment in the round as to whether they think they've done a good job or not. Instead now people are making judgments several times a day. Why did you vote this way on that? Yeah. Why didn't you say what you really believe on this thing? And it's an impossible circle.
So the 24-hour rolling media creates more of a problem.
And social media, I think, in particular. So inevitably in our system you form a government if you control a majority in the House of Commons. You need to have a degree of cohesion as a political party. You can't have everybody all the time just voting in different directions. You inevitably have some people voting and saying things that they don't really believe.
But that's the big tent politics thing, isn't it? That's how Labour are facing this at the current time. There's a broad coalition of views. What do you make of this new Labour government? I don't think there are many Tories who, behind the scenes, would not admit that you guys deserved to lose power.
I think it had got pretty ragged towards the end. And I first came into the Commons in 1997. There is a point when the electorate decides that it simply wants to change.
We're done.
The huge difference between 97 and this year is that in 1997 there was actually enthusiasm for the Blair government. It was very, very different and a very big vote for it. Whereas this year, Labour got a big majority in the Commons, but secured with a very, very small percentage of the electorate actually voting for it. So I think that's the first very, very big change.
And Keir Starmer's popularity ratings plummeted, I think, 45 points.
Yes, I mean, from the opposition's point of view, they've made a magnificent start.
Do you think realistically whoever is going to be the next Tory leader, I don't know if you're backing anyone publicly or not.
Not yet.
Do you think you will?
I may do, but I'll certainly wait until it's down to 2 before
Okay. Do you think that any of the 4 candidates who are in the running has a likelihood of actually becoming the next Prime Minister after Keir Starmer?
Well, I think it is entirely possible. And you've got to look at what happened to Labour in 2019. There were election defeats since 1935, and everybody said they're out for a generation, and they came back in 5 years. Politics now is a lot more volatile than it used to be, and if you'll forgive me bringing it back to my book, Kingmaker, this is the story of a very turbulent period.
Oh, you mean you were there through I mean, goodness me, we've been on air for most of that time. It's been exhausting for us watching it. God knows how exhausting.
Things you just couldn't predict. That's the point.
No,
you know, I relate in the book when I first went to see Liz Truss as Prime Minister. First item on my list was to check that she was going to have the 1922 Committee's centenary dinner in her diary, and it was going to be the following February. Never crossed my mind that she wouldn't be Prime Minister then. She'd only just become Prime Minister.
Did you invite her again afterwards anyway?
Well, they were all the former Prime Ministers were invited.
Very interesting to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. It's Lord Brady, Conservative peer, former chair of the 1922 Committee.